if a ghost, like, since the movie we're going to be talking about has ghosts in it, if a ghost happened to start sending you cryptic messages, would you rather want to figure it out on your own or call a team in like the Ghostbusters?
That's a great question. I would definitely call the Ghostbusters just to meet them and then probably solve it on my own.
It's yeah, I got this. Now get out.
Exactly. Nice to meet you.
Like,
Autograph. See you later.
yeah, bye.
What about you?
Oh, me? I'm the type of person that loves escape rooms, so I'd have to figure it out on my own. So,
Right on.
yeah. Hey, how you doing, everybody? It is I, the Terrorific Lady, otherwise known as Brandy. Welcome to Retro Horror School Talks, where I drag in a guest kicking and screaming to talk about and gush about what else? Retro horror. And with me, I have the latest guest that I have drug in, kicking and screaming. His name is Joe Miale, and he is a writer, director, filmmaker who has done things like commercials and music videos and short films and a film called Revolt, which is now currently on Peacock and Amazon Prime. So, welcome, Joe. It is so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit more about what you do, who you are, just all about Joe.
Right on. Well, like you said, I'm a writer, director, filmmaker, and Revolt is my first film. It's a sci-fi action movie you can check out. Stars Lee Pace and Berenice Marlowe in a end of the world alien invasion scenario, and working on a new film that's a horror film that I can't really talk too much about. But yeah,
I was about ready to ask, and are you going to be doing a horror film?
I am hopefully sooner than later. It's at a specific moment in time where I can't talk too much about it, but you can find some things about it online if you look not too many subtle places. You'll find some information about it.
Definitely looking forward to seeing more come out about your horror film.
Cool.
Now, for a little bit of background for people who don't know what Retro Horror School Talks is all about, I have my guests pick a horror film that they love from the eras that I like to talk the most about, which is the 1970s to the 2010s. And Joe picked a good one. He picked a really good one. I was so excited when he picked this one. It is I keep wanting to call it A Stir of Echoes, but that's the title of the book. The movie is called Stir of Echoes, which is a supernatural horror film released on September 10th, 1999. God, I feel old. Do you feel old?
No comment.
No comment. Okay, you're just going to throw me
Well, this is retro horror, right?
in.
So we're allowed to be
Yes,
celebrating movies from before 2000. That's the
yes,
whole idea.
yes. So, as I mentioned, it is based on the book by Richard Matheson, who also wrote the book I Am Legend, which also spawned several movies, I think,
That's
if
right.
I'm remembering like correctly. Yes, the
Yes,
latest, the one with Will Smith.
that's
So,
right.
Stir of Echoes made $21 million in 1999, about 39 million today. And many reviewers, I looked this up, I thought this was interesting. Many reviewers thought that this film suffered from other bigger, like kind of supernatural occult hits being released before that. The main one being The Sixth Sense, and then also The Blair Witch Project and The Mummy. It's like, do you think that Stir of Echoes suffered from all those other like releases being released before that?
I think it definitely did. I think those movies, those 3 movies, to think they all came out at the same time.
I know, it's crazy.
That's insane. But they're so different, and they show, like, 3 different extremes, right? Like a small, medium, and large version of I don't know, The Mummy is particularly a horror movie, and I don't think The Sixth Sense would even necessarily really be a horror movie by some of the standards we talk about. But those 3 films, like, hit each corner, you know? Like, of experimentation or boldness. And Stir of Echoes is it's not an extreme movie. It's kind of straight down the middle, which is what I like about it. But I think in that marketplace with those 3 movies, up against it in a way, I think it definitely would have suffered at the box office.
Yeah, wouldn't have even known that movie came out had I not seen it on a video rental store shelf. it's. I wish I'd have gotten the chance to see it in theaters, but I didn't even know it was in theaters. But yeah, Stir of Echoes is a good, underrated, in my opinion, hidden gem, like forgotten about, which tends to be kind of apropos for the 90s because some people think that the 90s as far as horror goes is just like it's crap, it just like has a lot of forgettable stuff, but I disagree. The 90s had a lot of really kick-ass stuff. A lot of supernatural horror especially came out around that time. So what I want to ask you is what are your thoughts about 90s horror and how would you describe like the impact of it or of supernatural horror on you as a horror fan?
That's a great question. I think because, horror is always this strange dichotomy of the most popular and also the underdog at all times.
Mm, yeah.
Like, every decade, there's articles or discussion about, like, is horror making a comeback? But if you have that discussion every 5 or 10 years, it's clear that it never went away, and it just still to this day, right now, there could be incredible critically acclaimed horror films or box office smashes and people still talk about the return of horror but it never really left. And so my feeling about 90s horror is because horror is so actually so continuous and so um, it's so present in cinema that I think horror really just kind of like rides the contours of what the movie business itself is going through. So if you look at like some of the films you just mentioned, like a Blair Witch Project is the extreme version of a 90s indie movie made for next to nothing, or like The Mummy, which was like a giant budget studio picture, or The Sixth Sense, which today would be made for a small budget, but at the time was like a fully produced like I don't remember what it cost, over $30 million for really a dialogue driven film
Yes.
at the time. So, like, I feel like the 90s was itself like an extreme of movie making and maybe an apex of movie making, like tiny little movies that could break out at Sundance or something like Blair Witch, or like huge studio productions, or even medium sized movies, which we don't really have anymore. So my that's my feeling about 90s horror is like it really just reflects what the 90s were doing. As I think all chapters of horror kind of reflect the era they were in. If you look at 70s horror, it's so great. Well, 70s movies were also of that gritty nature, and so were the horror films at the time. So yeah, so the 90s has a lot of cheese, and there's horror cheese, which I love, but is, and not so many enduring iconic horror characters maybe born in the 90s, but a lot of great films. And I do think that what I love about talking about Stir of Echoes is that it is kind of an underseen movie and therefore it's fun for us to talk about. Everyone knows The Sixth Sense and The Mummy franchise and Blair Witch, which itself became a franchise. Those are like so well known. They're like household names. But Stir of Echoes is kind of under the table. And I think that's what's really cool about it.
Yeah, and I'm very glad that we are getting to talk about it. Ugh, yes. Well, what I'm going to assume is that Stir of Echoes is not the first horror movie that you ever saw. So let me ask you, what was?
Well, let's see. I The earliest memory I have of a horror movie, and being aware of the idea that there was a kind of movie that was deliberately dark and terrifying and that you kind of weren't supposed to see was when I was very, very little, and my brother and my cousins were over, and they were watching this movie, and they were preventing me from seeing it. I was the little one, and they were, like, blocking me, like, physically blocking me from seeing the TV, back when TVs were smaller and not on the wall. So they
Yeah,
could actually block me from seeing the TV, and, of course, that just made me wanna see it more,
of
and I
course.
kinda pried out between them long enough to see one piece of it where a boy was basically being eaten by a tree. and of course, this was Poltergeist, and it looked so real. I mean, it looks real if you watch it today, because it's all practical effects, and it does look like the tree is, like, swallowing the kid in a way, and I just was shocked. I don't know that I was scared, I just felt like it actually was more scary because my elder brother and cousins were scared and trying to keep me from seeing it. That's the earliest memory I have of seeing a horror movie, even though if it was like 2 minutes worth of it, which I was like really little. And I guess it was Poltergeist when it was on television. So whatever year that was.
Oh boy. I don't know the year it was on television, but
I don't
I
know,
do know,
mid 80s
yeah,
somewhere, late 80s. I don't know.
because it came out in '82. That's the year I was born.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, right. So I was born a little bit before that. So this was like, a few years later. So probably the late 80s, and I was still a little kid. And it's interesting though, because having an older brother, you get to experience things that you might not get to experience as a kid. Like you're more exposed to scary movies. And at the time there was like, gangster rap was becoming a thing, and there was lots of swearing in it. And because my brother was like getting into all that stuff, I kind of was getting into it at a younger age than other kids might have been. So I really wasn't like shielded from all kinds of dark and scary and more serious stuff. But that is a like I remember going to see Aliens with my mother and my brother. Like she took us to see it, which is like such a cool mom, right? And we know, and she knew like we might be a bit scared, but we're going to go see Aliens, and it was pretty scary. So yeah, that's what my first theatrical horror memory is, probably seeing Aliens, I would think, with my brother and my mom.
Yeah, I don't know what it was about the '80s, but my mom let me watch horror movies young too, so
Yeah.
go '80s mom.
It was a different time, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Nowadays, I don't know if that kind of thing would fly.
That is true.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, I think Freddy Krueger changed the conversation of horror, so maybe it became a little more palatable to people like moms who weren't really watching a lot of films or horror films, and then all of a sudden there's this very cartoonish but scary boogeyman, and as scary as he was, and I was truly terrified of him, maybe that just cracked open the door, I don't know, because it was like compared to something like The Exorcist and stuff that came earlier, Freddy and 80s horror seemed a little less truly terrifying and a little more bright and cartoonish in some of its appeal. So maybe that's the reason. I don't know. Alien, I don't know. That Aliens rather is it's as action filled as it is. It was still pretty terrifying. I was probably Newt's age. Watching Aliens.
Ah, yeah, I don't remember when I first saw that. It was a little bit later in life. Right now, as far as Stir of Echoes goes, do you have any nostalgic memories connected to like when you first saw it? Do you remember when you first saw it?
I don't. I think I might have seen it in theaters because my memory of it feels really old, but I don't have a specific. I mean, I saw so many movies in theaters at the time and even now, so it all kind of blurs together. But having seen it at different chapters of my life, I know what's going to happen. So I must have seen it when it came out because I always know. I don't remember ever being surprised by it until that, except for that first time. So I think that was probably in the theater.
And do you think it still holds up? Like my math sucks, so I think it is 30. Wait, no. I'm not even good
26,
at math.
20.
It's old. Okay, so
It's
it's old.
26, I
Okay,
guess.
thank you. There's my
Yeah,
math person right
yeah.
there. So
Definitely not me, but I
well,
can add 1 to the number 25.
well, today you're my math person,
That's right.
but do you think it still holds up?
It depends on what that means. It holds up, visually. There's not, like, some kind of very dated effect or anything like that, some films have an aspect to them that just looks ridiculous. They don't have it's set in '99, they don't have cell phones and all that. It doesn't really matter one way or the other. It feels true to its time, and also, it's not the kind of movie where internet searches and cell phones would really change much. Or some films were like, "Oh, if they just had some forensic evidence, it would be over." Like, it really it holds up from a technological perspective, it holds up from a visuals and sort of effects, aesthetic. Um, I think by today's standards, especially for a dramatic horror film such as this, I don't know that the characters are as fully fleshed out as we would probably want today, you know? And I think some of that has to do with what TV has done in the last 20 years, where it's given us so many episodes where you have so much
Right.
time to really develop characters. So in a way, we expect more out of a 2-hour film that the characters are gonna be so rich. And maybe that's not fair, but I just think maybe some of the I mean, generally, there's nothing lacking, but I think if there was one area you know, I think there would if you made this movie today, you would have to maybe give us a little more edge and detail to character. And act honestly, and this is a bigger discussion perhaps, I think you'd have to make the movie a lot scarier.
Hmm. Interesting.
Well, you watched it recently as
Yes.
well as I did in preparation for this. When you're watching it, for me, this is a question for you. For me, I was watching it thinking, I'm really engaged. This is kind of a thriller. This is almost like falling into the 90s thrillers, right? Because most of the tension is really between the living people. And I wasn't horrified at all. And I didn't feel a ton of dread. Granted, I've recently just seen Nosferatu on a big screen and it's filled with dread. But, I not there's no comparison with those two films. But, even with The Sixth Sense, which came out at the same time, both films, Stir of Echoes and The Sixth Sense, feature characters that can see spirits. But in The Sixth Sense, which is not the most terrifying movie, but is really beautifully done, you actually do fear for the boy because, he seems truly plagued by his visions. And with Stir of Echoes, it feels a little bit more, yeah, I never worry about Kevin Bacon's character's life. I never worry, you know, he seems trapped in his new and we'll get into the story and I guess the spoilers, but he seems trapped by his newfound ability to see a specific spirit and the problems that she's had and why she's dead. And that's interesting and it's kind of gripping, but it's not really terrifying. I don't know. What did you feel that way?
Um, uh, I was pretty creeped out by it. I remember when I first saw it, but now I'm like looking through the lens of having seen it. I don't know how many times at this point. I lost count. There were some parts that really they still disturb me very
Yeah.
very much so, especially like the one kind of like near the end, kind of like delve into a little bit of a spoiler here, but near the end where he finds her body and then he reaches out to like touch her hand, and then
Yeah.
he's able to see like what goes on and what went on, what happened to her. That part just still like really disturbed me. It was really upsetting. you know,
And I agree. That flashback that answers that shows her death and the manner of it is truly disturbing. But that's like almost at the end of the film, right?
yeah,
So I, it also occurs to me. I think this movie. I don't think any I think one person dies in the entire movie, other than the girl. We should say that we're getting into spoilers here, I suppose. But
yeah, yeah,
the movie's like 26 years old. You should probably see it before you listen further.
yeah. Go, yeah,
Yeah,
go,
go.
go see it, and then come back.
Yeah. I don't know what the year, at which point you could just speak freely of something that's been out and assume people have seen it or don't care if it's spoiled a little bit. But there's this girl who's been murdered before the movie begins, and she is the cause of really all of the horror elements and supernatural elements in the film. And there's not a multitude of ghosts. There's not like in The Sixth Sense, it's like the kid can see all manner of dead people, and that's why that's scary. This is one person who gains an ability to see one ghost essentially, and he has presumably the ability to see more, but it's not in the story. But it doesn't open with someone dying or someone being terrified, and it doesn't have a death until I think pretty late past the midpoint where um, the neighbor's son sort of I think kills himself out of guilt or something like that. Am I getting that right? There's a dream that there's like a foreshadowing that doesn't actually happen. But so anyway, but even if that is right, like there's basically a pre-movie death and maybe one off-camera kill, and that's it in the whole movie.
Yeah, like, and it never, if I remember correctly, the first like death, it does it or death. Like I was never really sure like what happened. Like, did he survive? Did he not? Because even the dad was like, he might make it, he might not. I don't know. So that's kind of left. That one's a question mark.
Oh, that's right. So yeah, maybe even no deaths in the movie other than the principal death that creates the story. So that's interesting. Even obviously The Sixth Sense begins with the death of the main character, another spoiler. And has I think other deaths in it, but and not that we shouldn't really just be comparing those two films, I suppose, but just in terms of the horror genre in general, it seems like it's a very low death count.
It is actually like you expect like a lot of deaths in a horror movie. Like, now that I think about it, yeah.
Well, I don't, personally, I don't expect deaths, but uh, I expect a certain dread or a sort of an exploration of death or mortality, and that certainly is in the film. But again, I didn't even really fear for his character so much, and I think that what's interesting about it is, uh, and something I wanted to talk about when I saw it was it's the rare horror thriller, I guess we'll call it a horror thriller, that takes place like in the middle of a city, right? It's
Yeah,
not the cabin in the woods. It's not the remote house. It's not a vacation weekend where no one's around. It's literally in Chicago in like working class neighborhood where everybody knows each other. There's scenes where they go to the ball game. There's scenes where they have like a block party. I mean, there's so many extras in this movie. And I think that's actually a reason to see it. Like it's very rare that you see a horror thriller in a community. And obviously those some of those characters are very much involved ultimately in what's going on. But it's not a oh we're terrified because these characters are alone in this house, you know?
yeah, and now that I'm thinking about it, probably also the one thing that I kind of wish they developed a little bit more is the nature of Kevin Bacon's powers and his awakening. And it's like, I don't know, just I can't like really describe like what I was wanting. And even like still like when I first saw it, I was like, huh, like, okay. But I wanted more. Maybe it would have been interesting if the son was able to just kind of help him along, like maybe a little bit more. I mean, they showed like certain parts, like the son trying to tell him like the name of the song by moving his the dad's hands on the guitar, trying to figure out just the chords of that song. But
Right.
yeah, yeah, I wanted a little bit more there. That's probably like one of my nitpicks about this film, even though I like it.
I agree. I think actually you're touching on a bigger thing, which is and maybe one of the reasons the movie never found like a big, a huge audience or like really cut through is that it has a lot of these really interesting elements that I find very engaging, and it's a really well told story, and you know that almost goes without saying. Like it's almost a classic ghost story
Yeah,
in a lot of ways, right? But it has, in terms of the horror elements, the scene craft, and the kinds of interesting things that occur, it has a lot of them, like more of them than I realized until this most recent viewing. There's like it kind of stacks up a lot of different ideas and maybe doesn't ever let any of them fully develop. The kid is someone who can see spirits, but this is not really super consequential to the story, but it's sort of hereditary. And so his father, he's not been aware of his own ability until he agrees to be hypnotized by a friend for fun, and it like opens the door. And you go, okay. But that's not the only aspect. There's a lot of that's like just hypnotism is a whole topic in this film, but it's not like you're saying, you kind of could use a little more. And I was the one scene I did not remember until this rewatch, which was surprising to me, was they meet someone else. It's like a scene right out of The Shining. They meet a man
yeah,
who recognizes the boy's ability to see spirits and mentions it to the mother and figures out that it's the father who carries this ability and makes an outreach to her. And it was like right out of The Shining, where it's like, oh, I can, they know each other's names because they can presumably talk to each other mentally. But that is that the same skill as seeing ghosts? So anyway, there's a lot of like there's many different horror ideas that are very well integrated, but as a result, there's kind of a new horror idea every 15 minutes in this film, as opposed to developing further on the ones that exist, you know.
Yep, I remember seeing that scene. Is like, yep, that's because I'd also recently watched The Shining a few days before this, so it's just like, yep, that's from The Shining.
You're having a
But
great week. You watched The Shining and Stir of Echoes in the same week.
yeah, yeah, and then later on this week, it's going to be the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Well, happy Halloween to you. Today's January the 6th.
Yep. Well, it's Halloween every day
That's
for
right.
me.
That's the rule.
Yep.
Yeah, but I felt the same way. It's like, okay, this is The Shining. And then we got to some other scenes, and there were sort of not that they're all tropes from other films, but just that there's all these like horror elements, um, some really great simple ghost moments, you know. Not from the movie Ghost. I mean, just supernatural
Yeah.
spirit
Yeah.
moments. And again, not a lot of scary stuff, but so there's that, and then with his ability is, I guess, the ability to sort of foretell the future a little bit because he does have 1 or 2 moments like that. Um, and then, like you're saying, the boy also has this ability, and it doesn't hugely factor in, like, the kid doesn't really contribute except that the father and son have some nicer moments because, you know, not that they were not getting along. If you made this movie now, the note would be the father and son should not be getting along until they share this ability, and it should bring them closer together. And I don't think that would necessarily make the movie better, but that is the kind of note you'd probably get if you made this movie today.
Yeah, I would, yeah, agree. That would make like an interesting kind of little side story there. Interesting kind of
Yeah.
like theme of connection and family. And speaking of themes, this movie tackles quite a bit of them. It tackles a bunch of different horror ideas, but also tackles a lot of pretty heavy themes, like for instance, the nature of justice and restitution, like giving a voice to those who can't speak up for themselves, repressed trauma and memory, and the idea of secrets and guilt and ignoring inconvenient truths for the sake of just, peace. So, how do you feel that these themes or any other themes that you can think of are communicated throughout the story, throughout the characters, through the effects, through the way the movie is filmed?
For me, because it's the rare horror film, like I was saying before, that is set within a community. And in the film, that community is so that is an aspect that's very well fleshed out, I think. Especially again in horror, you don't get that a lot. Usually, it's like the family, and they're very isolated. Not in this case. It's a community. There's multiple sequences establishing the vibe of this community. It's a working class community. They all kind of know each other, and that does factor into the plot. But because it's that part is so fleshed out and so rich for me, I didn't I didn't feel like those themes were forced down my throat. I felt like the themes you're mentioning were definitely there, but what I actually enjoyed was I didn't feel like the film was trying to preach too much. I felt like it was actually just telling a very like it's like a local crime thriller. It's like, you know what? Spoiler again, like ultimately Kevin Bacon does find a body in his house. Ultimately that the neighbor's kids, you know, harmed and accidentally murdered this girl and hid her body while the house was being built. And another neighbor owns the house. Kevin Bacon's character rents it. And that's really the mystery. And so yeah, there's all of those themes are present, but for me it was the almost the at the time, the modern day working class cultural portrayal kind of overtook the themes for me, and I was just like caught up in their community's, story.
And it's you mentioned working class, and I remember reading in this article about Stir of Echoes how it's funny that the character played by Kevin Bacon, Tom, I can never pronounce his last name, so I'm just going to call him Tom. Tom is basically he's a lineman for a phone company, so it's basically like helping people make connections, and he's a conduit of sorts, but whenever he's hypnotized, then he's a whole different kind of conduit. I don't know where I was going with that. I just found that interesting.
It's funny. I didn't really connect all that. No pun intended. He mentions laying cables or laying wires at some point. I don't think they ever really showed him at work because he gets caught up in his own stuff and then he stops going to work. I would have liked a little bit of that. That sounds cool.
Yeah,
That's like a
I
whole
think.
other movie where he's connecting the lines and all that, but it is sort of a nice sort of, I guess, ironic and suitable job for him.
Yep. I think the only time they showed him at work was when he was calling his sister-in-law to
Mhm.
say, just like, "What did you do to me?" And she's like, "I just implanted a suggestion to make you more open minded, to receive everything that comes in." It's like, gee, thanks a lot.
You're right, and you're right. I didn't know what he was really I didn't know what he was doing at the time, for his job, but you're right, that was the one scene where he was at work, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then you see him stuff a bunch of papers in his back pocket for faxes or something. I don't know.
Some
I'm probably just remembering all this because I just saw this last night
Oh,
again.
absolutely. These details are not, highly relevant to the story, but,
No.
he was I like how you're assuming it's faxes because it was, like, 1999, and so people will do
Yes.
he was gonna go home and do a lot of faxing later on, yeah.
Yeah. This. Yeah. It was a fax machine. Yes, it was a fax machine. Now I'm just like I'm gonna get hung up on the fact was it a fax machine or was it not? It's just like it was. It was. Okay, now I'm gonna get myself away from these like little like I don't want to say unimportant details, but I don't want to get hung up too much on that. And I want to talk about the fact now that we've mentioned that Stir of Echoes is a supernatural horror thriller film cross, just whatever we want to call it. And like any subgenre of horror, it supernatural has its characteristics. It usually delves big surprise into the theme of the supernatural, sometimes the occult. These elements often act as the antagonists or the enemies, like in the film. And there's a sense of tension through the atmosphere. The characters may feel powerless, they may question their sanity. They may face moral dilemmas, usually related to good, evil, sin, redemption. And the supernatural can also be a symbol or a metaphor for unresolved grief, guilt, trauma. It's like, do you feel that Stir of Echoes fits this textbook definition of a supernatural horror, or do you think it subverts the definition in some ways?
I think it might do neither.
Oh no!
No, not in a bad way, not in a bad way. I don't know that I don't think this film was particularly subversive in any fashion other than setting a horror movie in a very busy community and not having characters really stuck home alone and trapped, or no one's ever really trapped. So that's a bit subversive, but in terms of supernatural, you described supernatural as often these elements or entities are the antagonists, and they're not the antagonists in
No,
this film, right?
no.
In this film, the only real ghost, there might be more than one, but I think there's only one, and she's a victim, and she's the victim. And to me, it's like this is a elaborate version of what everyone imagines, I think, as the quintessential classic ghost story. You're in a house, there's a ghost, you find the body because the person was killed in your house, and they want you to find their killer. Like, to me, that's like Ghost 101. That's like when you're a kid, what you think it is. I think that's a very common belief people have. And this movie is just like a big version of that. Like it's a unique version of it because of the community and because of some of the story choices, but I don't really feel like it subverts any of that. I actually feel like it's almost a great 90s thriller with a minor supernatural with several small supernatural elements, including the hypnosis and the visions and the ability to see a ghost a few times. But there's no ghost killing people. There's no he has a few strange visions, like a really great scene in the bathroom that's reminiscent of the scene in Poltergeist where Kevin Bacon's like pulling his teeth out and stuff. There's some great moments, but most of those are in his mind. So it's not all that supernatural. It's kind of like a vision, which is I don't know, is a vision's not really supernatural. To me, supernatural or paranormal means it's something happening that, like, defies science, supernatural, like, it's beyond what we could explain, but his visions are all explainable as visions. and the only unexplainable part is when he sees a ghost and then actually finds the body and has visions of her murder. That is sort of the magical part. But yeah, so I don't know what I'm curious what your answer to this question is.
Uh, do I feel it? I feel it definitely subverts in the fact that it's like the ghost is not the enemy. Like in a film like 13 Ghosts, I'm thinking more specifically of the remake. Yeah, just a bunch of like really pissed off ghosts coming after this family and after Matthew Lillard, and so that's definitely like that fits the quintessential definition of a supernatural horror film. But yeah, this one I feel does subvert it a little bit and maybe goes into it's funny that you mentioned the paranormal because I was kind of thinking that whenever he like had his visions and with his premonitions, a lot of that's almost paranormal psychic like style abilities. I think
Yeah.
of it almost just like you could say it's a paranormal type film as well because it deals with those elements.
That's true. It doesn't have any typical poltergeist activity, right? There's not really slamming doors. There's just some visions and there's conversations the ghost is seemingly having with the child. Yeah, but it's very subtle. It's very subtle. I think that's actually what, again, I personally, what I like about this movie, beyond what I've already talked about with the community portrayal, is that it's kind of like, it's almost a ghost movie for people who don't believe in ghosts or for people who don't love paranormal stories because most of it is not based on that. When you could see some if someone doesn't care for that kind of story or they don't find it believable, this movie's very it's almost like a very realistic and grounded ghost story.
Yeah, like that's one of the things that I've always liked about this movie. It's like you mentioned the things about the community, and it's always felt very grounded to me. The Exorcist is way like a movie like The Exorcist. It's way out there. 13 Ghosts. It's way out there.
Yeah,
But Stir of Echoes is something that I hope would never happen to me. Be like seeing just like a bunch of
yeah,
creepy visions and ghosts. But I
yeah.
could totally see that just happening for real. I hope not for real. No.
Am I crazy to think that I actually feel like The Exorcist is, like, the most grounded horror movie?
Oh, seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, because partially because of the filmmaking style, like, William Friedkin, everything he did felt, uh, so raw to me and so realistic, and then in that film in particular, like, yes, there's supernatural elements, but it's aged so well, there's no it's like if you look at Poltergeist, there's literally, like, objects flying in circles, and some of the effects have gotten a little old, and you just appreciate, like, they really went for craziness, there's, like, giant demons and crazy, crazy things happening in that movie. It becomes like a cartoon. And to me, The Exorcist is like the realest horror movie, other than Rosemary's Baby. I think those two, to me, they're so realistic. I know that like some really unrealistic things happen in The Exorcist, but when I watch it, I'm still terrified of that movie because it feels like someone rolled camera on an actual exorcism. That's just me. I'm a little unhinged.
Yeah, well, I think probably for me, The Exorcist was just way out there. So sometimes, like with mainly just like with the demon, the demon like of the possession, and maybe that comes from my. I think I'm normally not a big fan of possessions type movies. I think it's kind of, in my opinion, a little played out. It's not really my cup of tea, but it's awesome to hear other people like love those kinds of things and talk about them. You find that sister.
That's a valid, complaint about possession movies. I will say The Exorcism is like the possession movie. So
It is. It's the gold standard for
yeah,
all like
a
possession movies.
and all of the playing out that may have occurred happened after that, because
Yeah,
that movie was so big and everybody in the
I
world
know.
saw it, and then every year there's, like, 10 possession movies that are just trying to do The Exorcist. So that's fine, but yes, I hold it to me, it's in its own on its own shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the only yeah, side note, the only possession movie that I feel like maybe attempted something a little different is Insidious. Talking the first one.
Very,
Yeah.
very true. I
Yeah.
agree. I agree.
Because it was necessarily it was the house in a sense that was possessed
Mhm.
instead of the person. I was like,
That's right.
huh,
That's
okay,
right.
that's an interesting concept. And you could maybe say at the Amityville Horror was almost like, they maybe it borrowed like some from that. But yeah, Insidious was good. I thought probably one of the few but possession movies that I like.
Now, does Stir of Echoes doesn't quite have possession. It almost comes close, right? There's moments
Yeah,
where
yeah.
he, touches the ghost or the ghost reaches out to him, and then he's trying to think, was there am I crazy? Was there a moment where someone was speaking as her? No.
Yeah, no, you're right because they were trying to talk to their son, and because it seemed like still
Yes.
freaking out. She
Okay.
goes, "Don't ask the boy any more
That's
questions.
right.
Talk to me."
So going back to our comment about the movie has a lot of horror elements in it,
Yeah,
and some of them are not fully developed. There's just one tiny scene where the boy suddenly has not a woman's voice, but just a sort of possessy voice.
yeah,
And he has like maybe 3 lines of dialogue, and that's one of those many horror elements that's just in there, but it's not fully baked. But I don't know. It doesn't make the movie worse. It's not really a criticism. It's just an observation. The movie's very stealthy because I'm not, as we're talking about it, I'm sort of seeing through some of these techniques. But watching it, I was, because they're coming at you sort of one at a time, and you're just kind of like, oh no, now this is happening. And the storytelling is so strong that I think you miss some of these points that perhaps are points of weakness because they're working at the time. And maybe only in analysis do they start to get a little questionable.
yeah. Like now that we're discussing this, just like, huh? Yeah, they are actually throwing all these different kinds of just
Yeah.
like elements. It's just like, why haven't I noticed this
Yeah.
before?
But again, the storytelling is really strong. David Kapp as the writer and director, but also I'm assuming this book has a lot of these elements in it. I haven't read it.
I haven't either, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't be
We don't
able to
read
know.
books. We're talking about movies. We're movie
Yeah, who
people.
reads
Books.
books?
If it's a good book, they'll make the movie, and then you don't need to read it. No, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. There's a lot of elements in this movie that when you pull them out, they seem a little disjointed. But as a whole, I think we were talking about Secret Window, another David Koepp film. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
You're not really sure which way it's going, but it kind of works. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah, if you're gonna have a movie that has a lot of different moving parts in it or different like kinds of elements, yeah, need to make sure they're maybe it's just because they're so just like balanced out, I guess, in a way, like you said, by the storytelling and by the fact that maybe each element only appears possibly once, maybe twice at
Mhm,
most. So
mhm.
if it was just like overwhelming my senses with all these different kinds of like horror elements going on, then I'd probably be like, what?
I agree, and I think that it's because all of these elements are there is a consistency here, right? It's not like suddenly there's another ghost and who is that person. It's not like things are levitating or flying. It is very consistently about if you could take a bucket and put hypnosis in there, and that being connected to or similar to communing with the dead, and that being connected to having visions, and that being connected to the dead communing through you. So it does all work together. It does. But to our point, it's probably an underseen, unsung movie because other films would take one of these things and run with it so far that it becomes The Exorcist, it becomes a giant hit because it did that one thing so well. Or The Sixth Sense, where wouldn't it be cool if the boy seeing a ghost is talking to a guy who proves to be a ghost the whole time? Like
Yeah.
once you hit that idea, then all the little other things probably fall away. And this movie doesn't have that. It doesn't have like the one incredible reveal or the one horror element that is unlike any other movie. It's actually more like a comfortable movie in the middle, in the middle of all these other films.
Yeah, it's and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's a great watch. I love watching this movie. I've probably seen it like 5 or 10 times at this point in my
So,
life, and, it's great. Performances are great, the directing is great. One thing it has that you won't see a lot now, because this was it wasn't it was like a minor studio movie. It was Artisan Entertainment.
yeah,
It was, it was decently budgeted, probably a small budget for the time, but a healthy budget. So the production value and the camera movement, it has a sophistication and a polish. Like I said, there's huge scenes with lots of people, and a lot of horror obviously is smaller budget, so you don't see that. So in terms of like enjoying a studio horror film with all the trimmings, you could feel that the filmmakers had all the storytelling tools at their disposal. And I'm sure there's compromises, things they didn't have that they wanted, but compared to a lot of horror films in the last 10 years, this feels like a big budget. It feels like a big, almost lavish, that's not the right word for this movie, but sophisticated storytelling, camera moves, crane shots, like just the production. It feels like it's all on like really good sound stages with excellent built sets, and I could be wrong, but it just feels like, oh, we want to do all these cool things, kind of like What Lies Beneath, which was a much bigger budget than this, but
oh,
similarly, like such a big budget for such a contained story. This has that sort of kind of production value where you feel like I was saying at the beginning of our conversation, you feel the vibes that movies were in the 90s, where
yeah.
money was spent, movies were the biggest thing around, and they were gonna try to knock your socks off with every scene.
And speaking of, like, is there any particular scene or filming technique that was used in this movie that just really stands out to you as being like, wow?
There's a couple things. One is, the treatment of the ghost is really classy. It's not cheesy, it's not effectsy. Feels like there's a ghost there. You know you're seeing a ghost. She's not necessarily glowing, but she's not quite there sometimes. And I really like a few moments somewhere in the middle of the film where the camera sees the ghost, but Kevin's wife in the film, she doesn't see the ghost. So there's a scene where she has to like go into their cellar, and she thinks that the heater is out, so she wants to go into the cellar and light the furnace. And it's like the oldest, simplest trick in the book, where the camera pans and as she's walking by a ghost, but she doesn't see the ghost. We see the ghost, and there's a horror sting that jolts you, and you realize there's a ghost standing right there. And it's really that's actually a moment that's really terrifying, because you realize there's ghosts just all around us and we can't see them, and that's really scary. So I really love that. I love the treatment of the supernatural elements and how simple it was. Very, very often it was done in the most basic way and really effective.
Yes, it's like you mentioned, I love the way that the ghost was handled. It was just enough to know that she was there, and it wasn't just like, like ghost, 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 just like all over the place. With ghosts, I feel like there's a balance between like how much or how little you show them.
And it depends on the kind of movie it is and the tone. This movie is like a drama, essentially. It's not heightened. It's not overly dramatic, but it's a drama about working class people dealing with a mystery, and I think the ghosts are handled just right for that kind of story. And again, she's not a scary ghost. I mean, she's scary to witness and to realize she's there, but she's not trying to hurt them. She's actually trying to reach out to them.
Yeah, and I compare it to something like the Sixth Sense. There were quite, as you mentioned, there's quite a few more ghosts in that movie, and some of them were creepy, like up until Cole, real until I think that's the little boy's name, Cole,
Cool, yeah.
until he was maybe they need to be helped, and then that's when that movie took a little bit of a turn, and that seems to be the movie that Stir of Echoes is compared to the most, is the Sixth Sense. So I have to ask, I know that you mentioned that you like the Sixth Sense, but do you like it just as much as a Stir of Echoes? Do you like it a little bit more? Just like, I'm just curious. This is a curious question for me.
Yeah. I'm always hesitant to rank movies. I think I have seen and appreciate The Sixth Sense more, for some of its, storytelling and for some of its moments. Interestingly, the, Stir of Echoes begins and ends with the boy, and I think that you could actually cut the boy the boy out of the movie. And the movie would kinda be the same. Again, it's not I didn't it's just an analysis only after the fact that you're like, "Yeah, I mean, that was it's their son," but the boy wasn't particularly imperiled. He wasn't really all that helpful. I don't know that he did anything. I mean, he saw the ghost before them, but it didn't really matter. So the movie begins with the boy in the tub talking to someone, and you reveal there's no one there, and you realize he's talking to a ghost. And then it ends on the boy in the back of a car, and he's looking, and they're driving. They move to a new town or something, right? So they move to a new house. So they're driving down the street of what I guess what's their new neighborhood, or they're leaving their neighborhood. I don't remember. And he's looking out the window, and he suddenly is hearing all the voices of all the ghosts. So it's like a prequel to the Sixth Sense. Not that it meant to be, but again, that's a character you could actually remove from the film, I think, and I don't know that the story would have changed. So I don't know. I think with some of these uh, hairier elements in Stir of Echoes, I think The Sixth Sense is more of a master stroke of a movie. It's simpler and more focused, and it really is a clever idea done really well. So I don't know if someone's not seen either of them, I think you should see both.
Yes, I agree, definitely, like, see both. I like both of them for just completely different reasons, even
Yeah.
though they're in the same, like, s if like, the same subgenre.
Yeah, and guess that they came out in the same season. It's weird.
Yeah,
Like, really,
yeah,
you could talk about movies that come out in a certain era, but the year or the season a films comes out is really not meaningful. I mean, it's just that's when it was ready, or maybe they pushed something or whatever. But you can look culturally at like, oh, like in the '90s, these kinds of stories were being told. But I don't know if any one year. Sometimes it just times out that way, where a bunch of
yeah,
movies come out that are about something. But I don't know. Ghost stories are like some of the oldest stories we tell. So
yeah. Yep, and now we're coming back around to where we're seeing vampires all over the place. I never would have thought that was gonna be happening, like, like, 20, 30 something years later, but I'm all for it.
Oh, do you mean horror's having a resurgence again for the 100th time in a century? Yeah.
Yes, like horror is just, and I've also heard that people are getting sick of horror. That's an article I saw once. Like, no, we're not.
That article is often published alongside the article where horror is having its comeback. It's a we have too much horror, and horror is doing amazing and is having a comeback, and none of these things are true. We don't really analyze other genres in the same way. It's very interesting, like action movies, there always have been some, and uh, comedies, I guess there's definitely a downturn in the production of comedies, but we don't really talk about, I don't know, horror is will always be the abused child of the film world. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's just like
It's
so
jealousy.
it's always, yeah, yeah, yes, yes. But it's always been so strange to me. It seems like anything that's so heavily part of the pop culture zeitgeist is seems to be looked down upon, just like the case of highbrow literature versus what's considered like low, like some people might consider lowbrow, like comic books. It's just like there's plenty of horror for everybody. Shush.
It's also always been so fun because it's never really required, a budget. I mean, some movies have tremendous budgets, for horror and are great, but there's always going to be a new, very cheap horror movie that someone makes with some friends or just on a really small budget that is actually just really cool, and it's almost impossible to do that with every other kind of movie and story. But like with horror, you could just try things, and it will continue to thrive and entertain and speak for people because it's the punk rock, that's how I think of it.
As George Romero said, who's one of my favorite horror directors, he said, "When one horror when one horror film hits, everybody's like, let's go make a horror film. It's the genre that never dies.
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep thinking of just like this one part is Stir of Echoes. Like this is my train of my thought process here, just like random thoughts like to pop up in my head. So I'm thinking about that part in Stir of Echoes when he finally encounters like the ghost for the first time. He sees her on, like, he leans back, turns on his TV, and then she's there on the couch. So he was freaked out. If you were in his shoes, would you be freaked out if you slowly just had a ghost like pop by you on the couch when you were just trying to chill and watch TV? Or would you be like, ooh, I want to know more?
But both. I would absolutely be freaked out, and I would also be sort of excited. I'd be concerned as a homeowner. I'd be I'd be pretty concerned. It's like if you have like a leaky faucet or like some other, problem in your house, it's really frustrating. So yeah, I would be concerned that it would be an ongoing problem, but it would also be incredible. I think my experience would be sudden terror and then immediately taking out my phone and trying to film it. Like, there's a ghost on the couch. Yeah.
Like, where? Like, I don't see it. It's just like, your film is just like there's an empty spot on the couch. Just
I would
like,
I would get a selfie with it for sure.
yeah, cheese.
Do you say cheese when you take a selfie?
Yes, I say cheese to myself.
Wow.
Yep. And if hypnosis, of course, as we mentioned like a lot, was the main tool that opened up Kevin Bacon's mind to this supernatural world. So if you were asked like, hey, you want to be hypnotized and this would cause you to see evidence of the supernatural world. So we're gonna go with, you assume that if you're hypnotized, you're gonna see evidence of the supernatural world. Would you agree or would you disagree to be hypnotized? Would you be like, no, get away from me, or bring it on?
To be honest, it would really depend on what's on my calendar? Like like like, do I have time to deal with this? Like,
Do I have time
how
to deal with
yeah,
something?
how disruptive will this be? Go and how long will this is this forever? Is it like a season? Is it a week? I don't know. I would not do what Kevin Bacon's what's his name? Tim? I would not do what Tim did. I would not agree to a party hypnotism. I would I don't even know if hypnotism I'm not sure if it's all that real or if it's just more suggestion, but on the chance that there's something truly effective about hypnotism, placebo or otherwise, I don't think I wanna do it, like, drunk at a party? I wanna be in a very good setting with a really experienced person that I trust if they're gonna go in and have me barking like a dog or seeing ghosts or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a skeptic, honestly, when it comes to
Yeah,
hypnotism. So I would be like
yeah.
Tom is his name. I'd be
Uh,
like Tom in
uh
a lot of just like those aspects. Just like, no, not going. This is not going to work at
What you
all.
could do
But
is pretend it worked and then really scare your friends, be, like, freaking
like,
out and throwing stuff around. "I'm seeing
yeah.
ghosts." Like, you definitely
Like,
had
like
Yeah,
flailing around like on the floor.
yeah. You could definitely have a good time with it, but I don't think I would be doing that.
Yeah, no, I would definitely not be doing what Kevin Bacon's character did in that movie in Stir of Echoes at all. And uh, I have to say this just about the way Kevin Bacon portrayed Tom. I thought he did a really good job. Just like the performance, as just like the working class dad, just like husband, was very, very strong. And a lot of people tend to agree because I looked it up, and a lot of critics think that this is one of his like best roles. Now we have come to the part of the retro horror school talks that I like to call the retro lightning round. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be throwing some questions at you, and you're just going to say the first answer that pops into your head. All right.
God help us all.
Yeah. Yeah.
You might have to bleep out half of these responses.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so first question. If being hypnotized can unlock any hidden talent for you, what talent would you want to unlock?
I wanna see the future.
Ooh, good one. Good one. Would you rather see ghosts or hear what everyone's thinking?
100% see ghosts because I think I can kinda figure out what people are thinking, but I can't see ghosts, so,
No.
yeah.
Is the idea of hypnosis fascinating or terrifying?
Mostly it's fascinating, not even fascinating, but curious. I don't find it so terrifying.
All right. Between these two Kevin Bacon characters, who do you think would win in a fight? Kevin Bacon's character in Tremors or Kevin Bacon in Stir of Echoes?
I mean, Kevin Tremors Bacon would kick ass.
He definitely would. He went up against a graboid, so yes. So if you can beat that, you can like beat anything.
That's right.
And now we could not end this without doing the famous game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. So what I've got up here on my other screen for people who like want to know is I've got this thing to where you can enter any like actor. I've only tried it with actors, but you can enter any actor and it will like tell you like by how many degrees he or she or they or them are connected to Kevin Bacon. So give me the name of like think of like a horror actor and we'll see if we can connect them to Kevin Bacon.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a horror actor that apparently, according to these 2 actors, they're often mistaken for each other by less, devout fans, and that is Ethan Hawke.
Okay. Let's see here. Ethan Hawke has they call it a bacon number of 1. Ethan
That's
Hawke,
high. Is that
yeah,
a good is that
yep,
good? Okay.
yep. So Ethan Hawke was in Leave the World Behind with Kevin Bacon.
So if you're in a movie with Kevin Bacon, you get a 1. Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's it. I won the game.
Yeah. Yay, you won. Just like you get
Woo.
my respect.
That's the best gift anyone and the best prize anyone could hope for.
Yay. All right. Well, I hate to say this, but unfortunately, we've come to the end. I would love to be rambling on just like all night if I could, but about horror and Stir of Echoes. But once again, Joe, I want to thank you so much for coming on and diving into Stir of Echoes with me. Like, do you have any thoughts or last lingering thoughts on why horror fans should see this movie for the first time, or maybe it's been a long time since they've seen it? So,
I think it's a good film. I don't know if it's a great film. I'll leave that for viewers to decide. I think it's a really good film. I think it's rare to see a film set in a busy sort of inner city and in the 90s and have a strong thriller element and incorporate lots of different horror elements in a really clever way that kind of just washes over you and keeps you gripping. It's not a long movie. It's concise. I think it's a good film. I think people should check it out.
yeah. And before I let you go for good, tell everybody out there where we can find you social media wise. And I know that you mentioned that you're going to be doing a horror film that you can't like really talk too much about yet. But
That's right.
do you have any other projects that you've done in the past or that are in the works that you can talk about that people should keep an eye out for?
You mentioned my film Revolt, a sci-fi movie with Lee Pace that is currently on Prime and Peacock, I believe. And yes, I'm doing a new horror film. It's called The Blur. You can look it up online, but I'm not going to talk about it here or anywhere. And yeah, working on a bunch of new things. Some of them are horror elements like that, and I'm excited to come back and talk about it at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have you back on to talk about that.
Cool.
Yeah. And so where can people find you on social
Oh
media?
yeah, you can find me by my name, Joe Miale, Miale. I'm in all the places.
No, no,
Easy to find.
he's made it easy for you. His social media is his name, everybody. So
That's right.
go, yeah, go follow him everywhere so that way you can keep up to date on all of his projects and things that he is doing. So to everybody, thank you so much for watching this episode of Retro Horror School Talks. Like and share with fellow horror fans because it really does help. And subscribe if you want to learn more about horror and dive into your favorite horror movies. Class dismissed, everybody. And I will see you next
Bye.
time.